Hi, hello, it's Ro. Today's a little bit of a different video. I wanted to share a time when my supervisor told me I wasn't cut out to be a psychologist. The reason I bring this up now is because I've been reading some of the comments. There seem to be a lot of people out there who doubt their abilities and whether they're cut out to be a psychologist or do a job that feels very demanding and a pathway that is very long and can be very hard. It just made me think about a time in my life where I really doubted myself as well, and if this video can touch any of you in some way or you can relate to it in any way, well, I hope it can be helpful. I wanted to talk a bit about, what happened and the background, and then actually some reflections and tips and stuff like that. As you can see, today's a little bit more chatty. I don't really have a script, but let's get into it. This was when I first started my master's training program. At the time, my supervisor was everything because they're teaching you how to do adult therapy, and her opinion of me meant the absolute world to me. I'd been kind of going all right, working really hard. I was writing my thesis at this time, and there was one particular client who now I can look back and say probably had some narcissistic personality disorder kind of traits. I was completely lost with them. I was just a trainee. I genuinely probably didn't know what to do. I was probably not helping the client that much. We were just kind of going around in circles. My supervisor at the time was a very experienced schema therapist, and one of the techniques that she said was that I needed to confront this client, which obviously freaked me out because I was like, how do I do that? That feels like a lot. But the idea was that I needed to tell the client that she was part of the problem. And we talked about it a lot in supervision, and I was offered two choices, and she basically said, you know what? This is what we're going to do. One, you're either going to write her a letter explaining everything and in a gentle, empathetic way, or two, which is kind of the more confrontational or brave kind of way, is I want you to go in and talk about it in the next session and say what you wanted to in the letter in person. And she's like, go off, have a think about it, and next supervision session we'll debrief and practice. And so I went off all like nervous and like really not liking confrontation, and I mustered up the courage and planned how to say it in a script, and I wrote it out and I brought it to my next supervision session. And I said, I've thought all about it, like I'm gonna confront her. I know it's helpful for the client. I'm gonna do it in the best, like kindest way possible, and I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna take the brave route. And I remember the way that my supervisor looked at me and basically said, no, I don't think you should. I think you should write the letter. And I'm gonna be honest, the complete details are a bit hazy, but essentially what I took out of that session was a little bit about how my style wasn't very strong, a little bit about how she didn't think I was ready to kind of do it in session, and a little bit about how it would be easier if I wrote the letter. Again, I want to say interpretation because we're going to talk about this later, but my interpretation was essentially, you're not cut out to be a psychologist. Like, you're not cut out to be confrontational. You're too soft to do this kind of work. And I left that supervision session just gutted, and I don't think up until that point I had felt this sense of self-doubt and self-criticism and just feeling like I had done everything wrong. I think I'd spent so much energy kind of pushing myself and to be like, you can be brave, you can do it. And I knew that she had offered me these two choices, and then when I picked one of them, she basically said, well, I actually don't think this choice will work for you, so you're gonna have to take the not brave choice. That led to a bit of a downward spiral, and from that day on I was really quite critical of myself and my abilities, and I got so stressed out. I never wanted to make a mistake. I always wanted to prove myself to the supervisor. Pretty soon after, like a couple of months after that, I found myself kind of having these breakdowns, and I was like, one day I was just driving to a dance practice and I just started sobbing in my car, and that was the kind of impetus that led me to start therapy myself and to start seeing my own therapist, which was incredible, and I have other videos where I talk about that. But today I want to talk about that idea of being told that I wasn't good enough and having that self-criticism and that self-doubt, because I carried it for a very long time. So the first thing is, just like there are many types of clients, there are many different types of psychologists. And it's not until more recently that I've come to realize that my therapist worked with a lot of forensic clients. She worked with a lot of people who would sit down in a session and not want to be there. There would be a lot of lying, there would be a lot of kind of manipulation, and all of it was protective from the client's perspective. They didn't want to get into the deep stuff, the emotional stuff. It was very hard, and so they reacted either in a more aggressive way, and that was like the style of person that she was very used to dealing with. It makes sense that they have to have a much stronger approach, and there does need to be more of this kind of suspicion. And I felt like I was like this naive little lamb who had the wool pulled over her eyes, and I was like, how do I do this? Like, I had no idea that she had these like narcissistic traits. But now that I'm practicing, I realize that I don't need to be that type of therapist. I work with a lot of families and children who are trying their absolute best. I work a lot in attachment and, making parents and children relationships closer. I work a lot in individual therapy in an area where the clients are all very self-motivated. They are the ones who are referring to therapy. It's a lot more of this like needing a supportive or strategies, or needing more of this kind of warmth and closeness, rather than kind of needing someone to tell them straight. To be fair though, even with that more confrontational style, I have gotten better with practice. If I could speak to my younger self, I'd say that, okay, well, I guess this is an area that we want to work on. Like, you're not very good at confrontation. It doesn't come naturally to you to do this, but it doesn't mean that you never will. And so it's kind of that growth mindset thing, the power of yet. You're not very good at it yet, but you will develop. And also, you don't need to be a psychologist that is used to working with forensic clients, is used to working through, the haze of lies, or needing to see beneath the surface and like read what's behind what they're saying. Like, I kind of take what my clients tell me at face value most of the time, and even if maybe it's not the real truth, sometimes it's good just to see things through their perspective for a little while, so that at least they feel like there's someone who understands them. And it's further down the track that we start kind of looking and seeing if their perspective is maybe realistic or balanced. Different types of clients, and there's allowed to be different styles of therapy, and I just understand that my style is just a little bit gentler. It's a little bit more warm. It's a little bit less like really analyzing your every word. The second thing is I wanted to talk about the lens that we hold. I had a very, very perfectionistic lens. I also came with a history, and we talked about this in therapy, of fear of authority, especially people who were like educational figures, teachers, professors, and I took this supervisor's word as gospel. And I also completely understand that the lens that I heard her words through, and I don't even remember the words now, they could have been completely inaccurate. That could have been completely in my head, and it could have been that she said something along the lines of, I don't think you're ready for it, as a style, you need to change. But maybe her intention was more like, you need to practice it, this is going to be easier, I don't want to push you too hard for your first time. Maybe her frame was just like, oh, you're different to me. And I have to be honest, I'm pretty sure the way she said it was a bit harsher than that. But I understand that there was my own frame and that intense fear of failure and that fear of authority that made the words seem hypercritical. And I genuinely, for about a year or so, carried with me that I wasn't cut out to be a psychologist, and that there's something in me that was missing or not strong enough, and I just couldn't work in this like kind of serious schema-based way. Think about when you receive criticism, like, you're probably not going to be perfect for everyone. And as my YouTube is kind of growing, I'm also noticing more kind of like, not necessarily hate comments. Had a couple of those. Yeah, very personal attacks out there, some people. But there have been comments just about like, I don't think you're right, and I disagree with this. And at first it kind of hurts. But on the other hand, I'm thinking, yeah, like, people disagree when I put out an opinion, and that's okay. It's not necessarily a bad thing. There's always going to be people who disagree, and sometimes the criticism is valid. Maybe I didn't cite something correctly, or maybe, what I said doesn't agree with their experience, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think I'm slowly building up my ability to take criticism as a form of feedback and not let it attack like my person or my sense of self-esteem and self-worth. The third thing I want to talk about is the power of having one person who believes in you. After this particular internal placement, I really wanted to work at Sydney Children's Hospital in this unit called Child and Family East, where they do kind of the whole kind of Eastern Sydney area. The interview process was quite rigorous. Like, the supervisor there really wanted to get a sense of different supervisees, and so a couple of people from different unis interviewed, and in the end he chose me. When I asked him, or we started kind of doing supervision sessions, I kind of asked him and I told him a bit about what I had experienced, and he said, you know, when I met you, there was just a sense about you and how you kind of understood the frame that we take here, which is about improving parent-child relationships, less about seeing the diagnosis of the child, less about, you know, seeing the child as its big behaviors. And he was like, I really loved the frame that you took, and even though you didn't necessarily have the training yet, obviously you haven't trained very much at all, but your perspective was something that really touched me. The way that he supervised me and the way that he was able to give me encouragement in areas less about performance of, you know, whether I could do certain skills or not, because obviously as a trainee and I couldn't do all the skills perfectly. He really looked into effort and, you know, trying, and, you know, I sat in on a couple of his sessions, and even when he walked out of them, he was very reflective and was like, oh, I don't think I did this right, don't think I did this right. For me, he modeled imperfection, or he modeled being someone who was still learning and trialing, and he honestly changed my life. I really, really needed that supervisor at that time of my life. I guess even though I don't know you personally, I want you to know that if you're doubting yourself, that there is a place for you out there. There is a skill set that you are right for. There are no personality characteristics that rule you out from becoming a psychologist, unless it's like cruelty or something. But no matter if you're more quiet or shy, especially to those people who are more anxious maybe, it doesn't mean that you can't be a good psychologist. It doesn't mean that you can't be a strong foundation for other people to lean on. And now that I have more experience, and obviously I have more positive feedback, and I've seen families change through the work that I've done with them, it's a lot easier to think that. But just push through, you've got this, and I believe in you because I guess I've been there. Yeah, I guess that's kind of it. I wanted to just wrap up and say that self-doubt and self-criticism isn't always a bad thing. Like, it's good to be self-reflective, especially as a psychologist. You need to be reflective. You need to be aware of what you're doing and how to change it and how to improve. However, we're always thinking about balance. We don't want to be narcissistic and say that we're going to be the best trainee or psychologist in the world. We also don't want to say that we can't do this and there's something about us that's personally broken or wrong or missing, like I was thinking. Saying that there are some things that I'm good at and there are some things I need to work on, they're not mutually exclusive. We can hold both things at the same time. We are learning. We are allowed to make mistakes, especially as trainees. You are meant to be shit. Like, really, just expect that you're going to be bad. How can we be good at something unless we've practiced it for a little bit? So don't make my mistake. Don't go in with this perfectionistic lens. We will always be receiving criticism. The more strongly we sit in a decision or take a direction or we have a certain style, the more criticism actually that we're going to get. I guess building up our resilience to that, getting used to criticism, is a really good practice. And so despite the fact that YouTube videos does make me vulnerable, part of me is grateful for the fact that people do criticize these videos occasionally. Thank you for a lot of you who are lovely. But the criticism helps me develop a form of mental resilience and the ability to take criticism, and that's a valuable skill. So thank you to the haters, I guess. And now, after a long time, I can look back and I can thank that supervisor for pushing me out of my comfort zone, making me really reflect on my own practice, and to not sit in that world where I was always perfect and believed that I was always meeting the standard and, you know, was always feeling like, you know, I did okay, and I kept on having to meet that standard. She kind of shattered that whole perfectionistic ideal for me, and maybe rebuilding this new identity of not needing to be perfect has actually been really helpful in my practice. So I guess that's it. As always, I hope that was helpful, and if you have any questions or have your own stories to share, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. I post videos every Thursday, and I'll see you very soon next week. Bye.